think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin. Putin is a nicer person than I am.
And he might be bad, he might be good, but he's a strong leader.
He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
It's weird, right? Never an unkind word for Vladimir Putin. So it comes as no surprise that while Washington, including the Pentagon, was up in arms over Trump's decision yesterday to withdraw troops from Syria, his favorite friend overseas, Putin, spoke out at his year-end news conference and said, on this, Donald is right. I agree with him. Trump's foreign policy positions always seem to benefit Putin and Russia. It's a long list that includes Trump's campaign changing the Republican platform to be more Russia-friendly, fighting to implement the sanctions passed by Congress, attacking our Western allies constantly, inviting Putin to Washington even when he was advised not to, and siding again and again and again with Russia over his own intelligence community on whether or not Russia meddled in the 2016 election. Bill Kristol's back. It makes me miss John McCain.
A lot of things make me miss John McCain these days, and George H.W. Bush, and a lot of Republicans who were against authoritarians around the world.
And it makes me feel sad about Rubio and the rest of their lobotomies. I mean, why aren't they hair on fire about this?
They should be. I just saw, though, that actually Mac Thornberry, who's the outgoing Republican chairman of Armed Services, sent a joint letter with Adam Smith, the incoming Democratic chairman, criticizing the Syria withdrawal and I think asking that it be reconsidered. So maybe Trump will actually bring Republicans and Democrats together, responsible ones on the Hill, against him. And I think he may be going, I just was talking to someone who's pretty close to people in the Defense Department. He may also be going for a quick withdrawal from Afghanistan. I do think, I mean, this thing, he believes this. I think, you know, that he also has his own indebtedness to Putin, perhaps, and other things. But he believes his America First stuff, and part of America First is not getting involved in complicated, messy situations where you have a few thousand peacekeepers and it's a very, you know, uncertain and unresolved conflict. I would argue, I think many people would argue that they're doing much more good than harm, and that the cost is worth paying, at least for now. But I think he's pretty determined to go ahead with this version of the America First agenda.
Samson, do we make a mistake by separating out the investigation into possible collusion and coordination with Russia from foreign policy stories that so please Vladimir Putin? I mean, they seem to be one and the same.
No, I mean, the list you went through shows the interconnectivity of it all. It started with the changing of the Republican Party platform during the convention. We still are not entirely sure why and who decided that that would be the change. It, of course, continued into the transition in which General Flynn was talking with the Russian ambassador about not responding aggressively to sanctions, which you can argue was within his right, but then lying about why he did that was very curious. And, of course, it continued into the Helsinki summit, in which Trump had this just utterly bizarre performance. So, in reality, everything that Trump is doing on the global stage is connected with these investigations, or it seems to be connected with these investigations. I would agree with Bill. There is an element of this that Trump has always been this sort of, you know, retrenched from the global scene, focus on the homeland type of guy. And to a degree, this is the fulfillment of it. But you can't just separate these two at this point. They're too intertwined. There's too many questions surrounding what kind of influences have been brought to bear over him. And that's continued as we now know that he was seeking business in Russia through the course of the campaign, which, of course, gave the Russians leverage over him.
And Rudy said through November
through
election
2016.
day. Donna, I want to put you on the spot because I think that we have too much timidity in the press to put that up every day and say there's not much else on Putin's to-do list. He wants America out of Syria so that he can use that country and you can use their warm water ports. He wants relief from the sanctions. Also, Derek Deripaska, one of the Russian oligarchs, got sanctions relief this week. I mean, I think there's too much timidity on our part to put these up every day and say why.
Well, I mean, I think that's the big question. And I mean, some of this might get resolved in the Mueller probe, and others, Congress is going to have to dig into this because it also seems that even when Congress has imposed sanctions, this administration fails to implement them. And there has to be, I mean, the question is the why that goes to that. And I think that it's going to be important for us to not like just leave it on the back burner or keep a running list without calling attention to it, because then it makes it seem like this is all okay. And there's something, you know, we can't identify, but there's something that just doesn't feel right about it.
Let me see that list again. Put that list up again. Eli, it strikes me that if President Obama had done all of these things, and they were all on Vladimir Putin's to-do list, or say a country that Republicans were very critical of his diplomacy was, say he'd done 10 things that Iran wanted. There's the list. If President Obama had done this many things that an American adversary wanted, Republicans would have marched on Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. I mean, this would be flashing red lights. This would have been a presidential crisis of epic proportions. Why isn't this front and center?
Well, in large part because the Republicans have decided that they are now Donald Trump's Republican Party, and they're not going to.
They like Vladimir's too.
And so they're going to say whatever Trump says because they're afraid of Trump's base, just like Trump is, apparently. I mean, you can go back not that long ago to when Mitt Romney described Russia as the #1 geopolitical foe in a debate and was mocked by President Obama for doing so. You can go back. I remember covering Jeb Bush's campaign back in a land before time when he was the Republican frontrunner, and he did a whole trip before he launched his campaign to a number of NATO countries to show that he was a hawk on Russia. That was sort of the standard boilerplate Republican foreign policy orthodoxy not that long ago. Trump has, inverted it completely on his head. And we can talk a little bit about and speculate about what the motivations are. Are they investigations related? Is there compromise on Donald Trump? Is it because he's always been an isolationist? We don't know. But one thing that's obvious, there is no process going on between the Pentagon and the White House when the president decides to send troops
or the CIA.
to a fake war on the border, or when he decides to pull troops out of Syria. He's not conferring with Mattis. He's just doing this almost, governing by tweet, controlling the military by tweet. And that's really troubling, I think, to a lot of people who've worked in government a long time, that's really how our government is going right now.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.